Chapter 1. The Death of a Traitor. The heavy mahogany doors of the executive suite clicked shut, sealing out the sterile hum of the floor. Armaan Malhotra stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, looking down at the sprawling Mumbai skyline. At 31, he was the youngest billionaire to hold absolute control over Malhotra Industries, a titan of technological manufacturing. He ran his empire with ruthless precision, a trait forged in the fires of corporate warfare. Right now, however, his mind wasn't on market shares. It was on betrayal. On his mahogany desk lay the final audit report confirming what he had suspected for weeks. Ramesh Sharma, a loyal senior manager of over 15 years, had sold classified prototype schematics to their fiercest rival. Voracorp, the legal machinery, had moved with terrifying speed. Ramesh was already behind bars, awaiting trial, his reputation and life utterly destroyed. Armaan turned away from the window, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. A knock echoed through the room. "Come in," Armaan ordered, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. The door pushed open, and a young man stepped inside. At 20 years old, Vihaan Sharma looked entirely out of place in the high-stakes world of corporate boardrooms. He wore an oversized, cheap blazer that hung loosely on his slender frame. His dark hair was slightly messy, framing wide, frightened eyes that darted nervously across the room before dropping immediately to the polished marble floor. "Mr. Malhotra," Vihaan's voice cracked slightly, betraying a deep, trembling anxiety. You requested my presence." Armaan slowly walked around his desk, closing the distance between them. He stopped just inches away, towering over the college student. Vihaan flinched back instinctively, shrinking into himself. "Look at me when I speak to you," Armaan commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low rumble. Vihaan swallowed hard, forcing his chin up. Up close, the resemblance to the man who had betrayed him was striking, yet Vihaan possessed a fragile, delicate beauty that Ramesh never had. Big, doe-like eyes swimming with unshed tears, a soft jawline, and a trembling lower lip. "Do you know why you are standing in my office today, Vihaan?" Armaan asked, his tone dripping with disdain. My father." Vihaan whispered, his voice trembling violently. "I know about what he did, but I swear, Mr. Malhotra, I didn't know anything about it. I was busy with my college exams. I live in a small apartment. Quiet," Armaan snapped, cutting him off with a sharp wave of his hand. He stepped closer, invading Vihaan's personal space until the younger boy's back pressed hard against the heavy oak door. Armaan caged him in, placing both hands flat on the wood on either side of Vihaan's head. "Your father stole millions from this company. He tried to ruin everything I built. The courts will give him 10 years, but that doesn't settle the debt he owes me. Please," Vihaan breathed out, a tear finally escaping and tracking down his pale cheek. "We have nothing. The bank seized our apartment. I'm just trying to pay my college tuition and buy groceries. Have mercy." "Mercy?" Armaan sneered, leaning in so close his breath brushed Vihaan's ear. "Your father didn't show mercy. And debts must be paid, boy. You are a senior undergraduate student studying finance, aren't you? You need money, you need a job to survive." Vihaan nodded frantically, terrified. Yes, please, I'll work. I'll work double shifts, I'll do anything." "Oh, you will do anything," Armaan interrupted, a cruel smirk touching the corner of his lips. "Starting today, you are appointed as my personal assistant. Your office is right outside these doors, but your primary duties will be performed right here whenever I snap my fingers." Vihaan's breath hitched. A cold dread pooled in his stomach. What kind of duties?" Armaan reached out, his long fingers curling roughly around Vihaan's chin, forcing him to look up. "Whatever I demand, Vihaan. You want to keep a roof over your head and finish your degree? You belong to me now." Chapter 2. The Crushing Weight. The weeks that followed blurred into a psychological nightmare for Vihaan. Stepping into the Malhotra Industries building every morning felt like walking onto a battlefield where he was completely disarmed. Armaan didn't just work him to the bone. He systematically broke him down. It started with impossible workloads and verbal degradation. Vihaan would spend hours organizing files, only for Armaan to sweep them onto the floor with a flick of his wrist, demanding they be redone. "Incompetent, just like your father," Armaan would sneer, watching Vihaan scramble on his knees to pick up the scattered papers, his hands shaking. Worse were the private demands. As the CEO's personal assistant, Vihaan was constantly summoned to the inner office under the guise of taking dictation or reviewing schedules. But the moment the heavy doors locked, the professional facade dropped. "Kneel," Armaan ordered one evening, as the office lights cast long, dreary shadows across the room. Vihaan stood frozen by the edge of the desk, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The constant humiliation, the lack of sleep from balancing his college attendance during the day and Armaan's relentless schedule at night, had worn him down to a shadow of his former self. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, and his clothes hung even looser on his shrinking frame. "I said, kneel, Vihaan," Armaan repeated, his voice sharpening with impatience. He stepped forward, grabbing Vihaan by the collar of his shirt and forcing him down. Vihaan's knees hit the hard floor with a dull thud, a sharp pain shooting up his joints. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and humiliating. He felt worthless, reduced to a mere object existing solely to satiate a wealthy man's bitter desire for revenge. "Please, Mr. Malhotra, not tonight," Vihaan choked out, looking up with a pleading expression. "I have an economics final tomorrow morning. I haven't studied." Armaan looked down at him with an expression of cold detachment. He reached out, hooking a finger into Vihaan's collar and tugging him upward until their faces were inches apart. "Your finals, your college, your life, they only exist because I allow it. Unbutton my shirt." With trembling, clumsy fingers, Vihaan obeyed. Every demand chipped away at his mental health, leaving him feeling hollow, dirty, and utterly trapped. He couldn't confide in anyone. The shame of trading his dignity for a paycheck and the fear of Armaan's retaliation kept him locked in silence. He felt like he was drowning slowly in deep water, and Armaan was holding his head under, watching him struggle just for amusement. Chapter 3. The Shattered Boundary. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Friday night. The rest of the corporate floor was completely deserted. The rain lashed violently against the glass windows, drowning out the city sounds below. Inside the private office, the atmosphere was suffocatingly heavy. Armaan had been drinking heavily. A crystal tumbler of scotch sat half-empty on his desk, and the CEO looked flushed, his tie loosened, a dangerous edge of volatile anger mixed with intoxication gleaming in his eyes. He had been brooding over a quarterly report, and the alcohol had stripped away whatever residual restraint he usually maintained. "Vihaan," Armaan called out sharply. Vihaan, who was sitting at the corner desk organizing spreadsheets, hurried inside, his heart pounding nervously. "Yes, sir." "Come here." Armaan didn't look up. Vihaan approached cautiously. Before he could react, Armaan suddenly lashed out, catching Vihaan by the wrist and yanking him hard across the desk. Vihaan gasped as he was pulled violently forward, his chest slamming against the mahogany edge before Armaan shoved him backward. In a swift, aggressive motion, Armaan hauled Vihaan off his feet and pinned him roughly against the plush cushions of the office sofa. The weight of Armaan's muscular frame pressed down, crushing the air out of Vihaan's lungs. "Mr. Malhotra, stop, please," Vihaan cried out, twisting his head away as Armaan's mouth crashed down on his neck in a rough, bruising kiss. "Shut up," Armaan slurred, his voice thick with alcohol and unchecked fury. The smell of scotch was overpowering. The line between punishment and twisted desire blurred entirely in the CEO's drunken haze. He didn't care about the rules he usually set. The alcohol had dismantled his inhibitions. "No, please, don't do this. Use protection, please," Vihaan sobbed, struggling desperately under his weight, pushing against Armaan's broad shoulders with all his might. But his strength was no match for the enraged, intoxicated billionaire. Armaan ignored the frantic plea entirely, his mind clouded by alcohol and a blind, consuming rage. With rough, impatient movements, he tore past the barriers. The intimacy that followed was devoid of any tenderness. It was raw, hurried, and brutal. Vihaan squeezed his eyes shut, letting out a stifled, broken cry as pain lanced through him. The violation was absolute. Tears streamed down his face, soaking into the fabric of the sofa cushion. He felt entirely subverted, his body used as a vessel for another man's vengeance. When it was finally over, Armaan rolled off him, heavy with alcohol, and passed out almost immediately on the other end of the couch, his breathing deep and heavy. Vihaan lay frozen in the dark, shivering violently. He felt utterly devastated. The physical pain was nothing compared to the profound, soul-crushing realization of what had just happened. He pulled his clothes back on with shaking hands, wiped his face, and quietly slipped out of the office into the rainy night, knowing he could never return. Chapter 4. The Silent Flight. Weeks turned into a terrifying ordeal for Vihaan. Shortly after that harrowing night, he stopped going to work. He didn't care about the job, the salary, or the consequences. He threw away his phone, changed his SIM card, and locked himself inside a tiny, damp sublet room on the outskirts of the city. But escaping Armaan Malhotra was the easy part. Escaping what was happening inside his own body proved impossible. A month later, the unmistakable symptoms set in: persistent morning sickness, overwhelming fatigue, and a growing, horrifying realization. Vihaan stared at the plastic test stick in the cramped bathroom, his hands trembling so violently he dropped it onto the tiles. Two pink lines stared back at him with damning clarity. Asterisk pregnant. Asterisk panic gripped his chest so tightly he couldn't breathe. The biology of it was a rare, terrifying anomaly, but the reality was undeniable. He was carrying the child of the man who hated his family, the man who had violated him without protection in a drunken stupor. Asterisk, what if Armaan finds out? The thought echoed in his terrified mind day and night. He'll take the baby away. He'll destroy what's left of me. He'll treat my child as another tool for his vengeance. Asterisk, terrified beyond measure, Vihaan made a desperate decision. He packed his meager belongings into a single duffel bag, withdrew every last rupee he had saved from his meager earnings, and fled Mumbai entirely. He moved to a quiet, dusty town in Rajasthan, far away from the glitz and corporate skyscrapers of the metropolis, burying himself in anonymity. 3 years passed in a blur of quiet struggle. Vihaan was now 23, having somehow finished his degree through correspondence courses, working remote data entry jobs while raising his children in secret. Yes, children. To his absolute shock, the pregnancy had brought not one, but 2 lives into the world. 12 months ago, he had given birth to twin boys, Arav and Advait. They had Armaan's sharp, striking eyes and dark hair, a daily, heart-wrenching reminder of the man he had run from. Despite the constant fear, looking at his sons filled Vihaan's heart with a fierce, protective love that outweighed his terror. They were his entire world now. Chapter 5. The truth comes to light. Back in Mumbai, the corporate landscape had shifted dramatically, and the foundations of Armaan Malhotra's cold, calculated world were crumbling. Seated at his massive desk in the top-floor office, Armaan looked older. 3 years had hardened him further, turning the ruthless CEO into a brooding, isolated figure. He hadn't seen Vihaan since that stormy night 3 years ago. When the boy had vanished the next day, Armaan had initially dismissed it as cowardice, assuming the kid had run back to his pathetic life. But as the months wore on, a strange, gnawing restlessness had taken root in the back of his mind, an unfamiliar sensation he refused to name. The intercom buzzed sharply. Armaan pressed the speaker button, his voice cold. "What is it?" "Sir," his legal counsel's voice came through, breathless and laced with disbelief. "You need to see this immediately. Federal investigators just released the final brief on the VoraCorp leak case." Minutes later, the legal counsel stood before Armaan's desk, laying down a thick stack of exoneration documents. "What am I looking at?" Armaan demanded, not touching the papers. "It's Ramesh Sharma, sir," the lawyer said carefully. New evidence surfaced from an anonymous whistleblower within VoraCorp. The logs prove conclusively that Ramesh Sharma was entirely framed. VoraCorp hacked his terminal, stole the credentials, and orchestrated the leak to sabotage our firm and ruin him. He was innocent, completely innocent. The words hung in the sterile air of the office like a physical blow. Armaan slowly leaned back in his leather chair. The color drained slightly from his face. Innocent? Ramesh Sharma hadn't betrayed him. He had destroyed an innocent man's life, thrown him in jail, and driven his family into destitution. And Vihaan? The memory of Vihaan's tear-stained face, his desperate pleas of innocence, and the brutal way Armaan had treated him rushed back with terrifying clarity. He had bullied, degraded, and ultimately violated an innocent boy who was just trying to survive. Guilt, sharp and agonizing, pierced through the armor Armaan had spent a lifetime building. He stood up so abruptly his chair crashed backward onto the floor. "Find him," Armaan ordered, his voice trembling with a panic he hadn't felt in decades. "Find Vihaan Sharma. Spare no expense. Bring him back to me." Chapter 6. The reunion in the dust. Tracking down a ghost took months, but Armaan's vast resources eventually bore fruit. Clues led his private investigators to a quiet, unassuming neighborhood in Rajasthan. It was late afternoon when Armaan's black luxury sedan rolled to a stop outside a modest, whitewashed house in the dusty town. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, unfamiliar rhythm. He stepped out of the car, adjusting his suit jacket, his hands sweating. He had rehearsed 1,000 apologies in his head, ready to beg for forgiveness, ready to offer anything to right the monumental wrongs he had committed. He walked up the short pathway and knocked firmly on the wooden door. A few moments later, the latch clicked and the door swung open. Armaan's breath hitched in his throat. Standing there was Vihaan. He looked older, wiser, but just as breathtakingly delicate, wearing a simple cotton kurta. The moment Vihaan's eyes locked onto Armaan's face, all the color drained from his skin. He froze, his hand gripping the edge of the door so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Hey, Armaan," Vihaan whispered, the name slipping out like a terrified gasp. He instinctively stepped backward, a look of pure dread washing over his features. "Vihaan," Armaan breathed out, taking a hesitant step forward, his hands raised, palms up in a universal gesture of peace. I know everything. I know about your father. The court proved he was framed. I came," Armaan could finish. A loud, cheerful commotion erupted from the living room behind Vihaan. Dama. Two tiny figures came toddling down the narrow hallway on unsteady legs, laughing and tumbling over each other. They were identical toddlers, roughly 12 months old, with wide, striking dark eyes and messy dark curls that bore an unmistakable, chilling resemblance to Armaan himself. Vihaan panicked, moving quickly to scoop both toddlers up into his arms, pressing their faces against his chest to shield them, his eyes wide with desperate terror as he looked back at Armaan. Armaan stopped dead in his tracks. His gaze moved from Vihaan's pale face down to the two toddlers clinging tightly to him. The sharp, undeniable features, the eyes, the age, the math clicked instantly in his mind with shattering clarity. "Mine," Armaan whispered, the word barely audible over the hum of the desert wind, his chest aching with a sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion as he stared at the family he never knew he had. Chapter 7. Reckoning and Redemption. The desert wind howled faintly outside, sweeping fine dust against the porch, but inside the small doorway, time seemed to freeze entirely. Armaan stood paralyzed, his eyes locked on the two toddlers clutching frantically to Vihaan's chest. The dark curls, the sharp tilt of their little chins, the distinct shape of their eyes, the mirror image was undeniable. They were his sons. The terrifying, miraculous product of that brutal, rain-slicked night 3 years ago, hidden away in the quiet dust of Rajasthan. "Don't," Vihaan choked out, his voice cracking with a raw, desperate panic as he took another stumbling step back. He hoisted the twins higher, his arms trembling violently under their weight. Tears spilled over his lower lashes, tracking hot paths down his pale cheeks. "Please, Armaan, don't take them from me. You destroyed my father, you ruined my life, you can't have them. Do whatever you want to me, put me in prison, ruin me again, but leave my boys alone." The sheer agony in Vihaan's voice sliced through Armaan's chest like a jagged blade. The self-loathing that had been brewing since the day of the exoneration papers boiled over into suffocating guilt. Armaan dropped slowly to his knees right there on the dusty welcome mat, discarding every ounce of his billionaire pride, his CEO authority, and his arrogance. "Vihaan, look at me," Armaan pleaded, his voice breaking, thick with unshed tears. He held his hands out, empty and open, keeping a respectful distance. "I am not here to take them, and I am never, ever going to hurt you again." Vihaan sniffled, his breath hitching as he stared down at the towering man kneeling in the dirt, bewildered by the utter lack of malice in his posture. "I read the exoneration files, Vihaan," Armaan whispered, his gaze swimming with remorse. "I threw an innocent man into a nightmare. I abused my power, I tormented you, and worst of all, I violated you in a way no human being should ever be treated. I spent the last 3 years living with the monster I created in the mirror. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know about them." He gestured toward the toddlers, who were now peering curiously around their father's shoulders at the stranger on the floor. "Could you?" Vihaan cried, his knees shaking until he finally sank down onto the small wooden bench behind him, pulling the twins protectively onto his lap. "You didn't care about me. To you, I was just a pawn for your revenge." "You were," Armaan admitted with brutal, agonizing candor, refusing to sugarcoat his past sins. "And I will spend the rest of my life paying for it. I don't expect forgiveness today, Vihaan. I don't expect you to trust me, but let me fix this. Let me give you and these boys a home where you never have to be afraid again. Not as my prisoners, not as my victims, but as my entire world." A heavy, aching silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft coos of little Arav reaching out a tiny hand toward Armaan's tailored suit button. Vihaan looked down at his sons, then back up at the man who had been his worst nightmare, seeing something entirely foreign in Armaan's eyes. Genuine, unconditional repentance. The walls around Vihaan's heart didn't crumble all at once, but for the first time in 3 long years, the suffocating darkness began to lift. Armaan remained on his knees, waiting patiently for a verdict, ready to spend a lifetime earning the right to stand beside them.